Excellent. Welcome, everybody. Thanks again for joining us today for the Environment for the Americas Bird Book Club. We are so glad to have you join us today and to be a part of our book club. I want to just share a little bit about Environment for the Americas. We are, and first let me introduce myself again. So Alicia King, I am a volunteer for Environment for the Americas. So I'm happy to be here as a volunteer. This is an important organization in the bird conservation arena, and I like being able to contribute in the best ways that I can. So we do work together to unify our voices for birds and their conservation. And so we do that in a variety of ways. There are many, many programs and many ways that we participate in the conservation arena and sharing the value of birds and the conservation of birds and the everyday things that people can do, as well as the big things that people can do. So we collect global data, local data, we do local surveys. We work with a conservation organization, birds clubs, universities, agencies, land managers to gather a lot of information and use that information to help us think about ways that we can really make an impact in the conservation world. We attend a lot of conferences so that we can, again, share our information and collaborate with other organizations and agencies and individuals. We create a lot of educational materials and can do a lot of community outreach. One of the things I'm really proud of is that we, as many of you know, focus on diversity, and we create educational materials in different languages, depending on what our theme is, depending on where we're working, who we're working with, and what the need is. And so typically Spanish, French, other languages, again, depending on what it is that we're working on. We also have some great intern programs. We work with agencies and partners to ensure that young people can get valuable educational materials and work opportunities where they can build their skills and kind of discover and figure out what kind of career they want to go into. And so that program is invaluable in getting young people headed toward a career in conservation. One of the big things that we do is celebrate World Migratory Bird Day. So we work across the world to engage people in various themes. Every year we have a different theme that we operate with so that we can share the value of birds, the value of the conservation efforts that we have. And we do this in collaboration with many, many people. And this year, water was the major theme for our focus for World Migratory Bird Day. And World Migratory Bird Day, although we say day, doesn't happen just on one day. It happens basically year round. We tend to focus our festivals and working with partners in the springtime and in the fall because of the migratory bird, the birds, migrating from one area to another. And that's, a big emphasis for when we do those sorts of things. But you can celebrate World Migratory Bird Day any day. I just want to share with you, particularly because I've been seeing a lot of hummingbirds in my area recently. We have a lot of partnerships that help support World Migratory Bird Day, as well as the conservation work that we do. And the Western Hummingbird Partnership is one of those, where we really collaborate across borders and with many, many different entities to think about how do we motivate people to take conservation actions for hummingbirds. Gathering the research, really looking at what benefits hummingbirds and the environment in general, and raising awareness through trainings and public events, and being able to hold workshops for organizations, schools, and people who are interested in joining the effort of that partnership related to the conservation of hummingbirds. So we, oops, I skipped a slide. I want to make sure that we call attention to not only the educational materials that we have available on our website, but the shopping opportunity that you have to not only find cool bird related things to shop for, but being able to support our organization. So we are a nonprofit organization that really depends on support from not only the grants that we write and the agencies that support us, but from people like you. So lots of cool things, glasses, scarves, jewelry, books, stickers, educational materials, Some things available for free on the website. So take advantage of going shopping and know that you're doing it for a good cause. We do want you to become our friend. We want you to follow us on all of our social media platforms, and Daisy will put some of those links in the chat as we go along so that you can easily click on them. But you can become a friend by having an annual donation and become a member of Environment for the Americas. And when you go to our website, you can find out exactly how to do that. So lots of cool ways for you to be able to support us. And so today, I am so excited to have Miriam Darlington visit us today. And as I said, this is a little unusual because we're doing this in the middle of the day. Well, kind of depending on where you are. I think Miriam's in a way totally different timeline, which is why we're doing it in the middle of the day. So I'm hoping that nobody knocks on my office door to ask me any questions while we're doing this. But I'm thrilled to have Miriam. And so I'm going to actually let her tell us a little bit more about herself, but I will share with you, and those of you, and I do recognize many of your faces or your names. I typically do a lot of page saves so that I can ask some questions from Miriam. And we recognize some of you may have read the book, or some of you are in the middle of reading the book, or have not yet started reading the book. So we'll go through and offer an opportunity for you in the chat. You can put your questions. You can raise your hand and let us know that you want a question, and then you can unmute and come on camera if you're comfortable with that, and then we can have a really fun conversation with Miriam. So I am going to close out my slideshow, stop the share so you can't see my messy desktop anymore. And Miriam, welcome. Welcome to the Environment for the Americas Bird Book Club. It is so nice having you.
Thank you so much, Alicia. It's really lovely to be here and to talk about my work, and to hear also about other people's interests and see what incredible birds they've been seeing, all of which kind of don't mean very much to me. They sound like strange made up birds. But anyway, my name's Miriam Darlington, and I'm an author and academic, and I'm from England, as you can probably hear from my accent. And it's 6 o'clock in the evening here, which is absolutely perfect for me. And it's lunchtime for you, I know. So I'm a nature writer, and I started out as a poet. So I have poetry, masses of poetry published, as well as my prose books. But what I've moved into doing now is writing what we call creative nonfiction. And I'm based, actually, my day job is at Plymouth University in the south of England, on the south coast of England. I'm sure everybody's heard of Plymouth because it's where a whole load of people went out to the Americas, what we call the New World, all those years ago. So I feel very connected with the US, not just because of that, but also because many of the birds that we get here in the UK migrate from the Americas. And I used to live in an amazing archipelago of islands called the Isles of Scilly, which people probably will not have heard of because they're so tiny. They're literally 2 miles long by 1 mile wide. And I used to live there partly because of my passion for nature and the environment and the seas, but also for birds, because every autumn in the Isles of Scilly, which is right in the middle of the Atlantic, just off the kind of southwestern tip of the UK, thousands of migrating birds pass over, and a lot of them used to drop down and rest on the Isles of Scilly. And in fact, that's just where I've been for my summer holiday with my daughter, who's also passionate about birds and bird conservation. And we've been participating in the Isles, I don't know if you can see my t-shirt, the Isles of Scilly 7-yearly bird survey, where we've been counting puffins and guillemots and razorbills and gannets and many birds that are actually quite threatened. And so that too is one of my passions. I'm absolutely passionate about conservation and protecting these wonderful species and the diversity of species that we have. So that's me. I live at home in Devon in the south of England with my daughter and my dog. And I write my books here. And sometimes, if I'm very lucky, as I've said in my book, The Wise Hours, I get to travel to interesting places to look at different kinds of birds. And of course, the last book was all about the marvelous owl species that you get across Europe, which I think some of them are quite similar to the ones you get in the US, and some of them are quite different.
Thank you so much, Miriam. So, Miriam, I just so you all know, Miriam has a couple pictures that she might share with us as we go into our conversation. And I definitely have a lot of questions, but would love to have your thoughts and your questions for Miriam, or things that you think, I know as I was reading your book, Miriam, I really appreciated all of the times that you said, we don't know a lot, or we don't know everything. There's still so much to learn. And I feel like, even though I've been in the birding world, for years and years, I learned so much from the things that you shared with us, and especially, as you say, birds that I'm not as familiar with. But one of the things that I'm interested in is that you kind of talked about the terrifying and intriguing, sometimes terrifying and intriguing calls of the owls. That you would hear these sounds, and you said something like they jangle the nerves. And when I think about owls and their calls, they're often used in scary movies, or if you want to set the stage for something like is kind of sinister, oftentimes use owls. But as I've, I guess, grown up in this birding world, every time I hear even the shriek of a barn owl, or the whinny or the ninny whinny of a screech owl, I'm like, oh, it's an owl. And I'm curious how you got to that point of loving owls, and going from that kind of that transition from the jarringness to the oh, it's an owl.
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, where to start? I've always been fascinated with owls, and I know I'm not alone there. And it is partly because they are so mysterious. We hear them before we see them. In fact, we usually hear them and don't see them. And I've always been fascinated with things that are difficult to see and difficult to know. And I have this niggling curiosity. If I find a creature that is mysterious, shy, cryptic, difficult to know, I will be like a terrier. I will want to know more. So these screeches and hoots, in mythology, we're told that they are portents of doom, and they're there to make us shiver. And they often are used to signify, like you say, Alicia, to signify something bad's about to happen in a movie. Well, the owl itself, the many species of owl that we have, are completely removed from that. They don't know that they're scary. They're hooting to communicate with each other. They might be arguing with each other, but they might be trying to attract each other during the breeding season in the springtime. So the language that they speak came to be so intriguing and fascinating to me that I was drawn out into the natural world at night to, first of all, to listen, and then to want to learn more about them and to see them. Because, as I've already said, I don't give up very easily, and you can't give up easily if you want to find owls. And I became fixated with the 5 species that we have in the UK. We have the barn owl, like many of you listening. I'm sure you will be familiar with the beautiful white-faced, ethereal, ghostly barn owl that inhabits our our dwellings, often our barns and old buildings, sometimes our big old mature trees as well. And we also have the tawny owl, which is almost like the most common one around here where I live, which is a lovely mottled brown owl with deep black eyes. They're like kind of watery black pebbles. Very, very beautiful, extremely camouflaged and very nocturnal. So you hardly see the tawny owl, although sometimes it can be quite crepuscular, which means that it comes out, between dusk and nighttime. So just as it's getting dark, that's the chance you'll get to see it. And then we have the little owl, which I think you also have, and that's very closely related to the burrowing owl. And I know that will be familiar, that kind of long-legged clownish owl that lives in rabbit burrows. We have the little owl, not the burrowing owl. We have the long-eared owl and the short-eared owl, although of course those tufts on their heads aren't ears at all. They're for display. They're just feather tufts. They just look like ears, and it's convenient shorthand to say they're ears. And then we also have an owl that was introduced, the Eurasian eagle owl, which I think, if I'm right, is the world's biggest, heaviest owl with eyes like fire. It looks like it's from the flames of Hades when it looks at you. It's this huge predator. And of course, all these owls, in spite of their kind of soft hoots and their beautiful round faces, and they can look quite cute. We say cute quite quickly when we're looking at a picture of an owl. They are absolutely perfectly adapted for stealth and for predation. So they are actually talon-bearing murderers of the night, these creatures. So there's a very kind of ambivalent feeling about owls. They're fierce, they're killers. If you got close to one, it might, I know that some of the owls in the US, I think is it the barred owl? It's known to kind of land on people's heads if you're anywhere near its nest during the breeding season. They will whomp you, they'll attack and try and frighten you away. So there were all these species of owl in the UK that I was fascinated with. And then something happened, which is a bit of it was quite predictable, really. As soon as you say, as an author, I'm interested in owls, people start sending you things. So I started to get sent information and tip-offs about where to see these owls, but also messages from my friends in other parts of Europe. Come to France and see the pygmy owls. And I was like, I haven't heard of pygmy owls. What's a pygmy owl? Perhaps I should show you a picture actually at this point. Shall I show you? I know you'll have some more questions, but I could perhaps share my screen.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now let me see. No, that's a little owl. I'm just finding here we go. So I'm just going to share my screen. And you can see my pygmy owl.
And Miriam, I'll share with you that somebody put Liz Linzer put in that we see Eurasian owls frequently in US movies, just because it's rare that, that the owls that, are here naturally would be used because they're protected or there's regulations and permits needed for that sort of thing.
Yes, absolutely. Well, these creatures are very, very highly protected. And it's illegal in this country to have any part of an owl. So if you find, a dead owl, you're not actually supposed to keep it. And this is to deter people from collecting live owls from the wild. You can't keep them as pets, for example. Captive bred owls you can have in aviaries, but you need a license. Can people see my screen with the pygmy owl on it? Okay, so this is this is the pygmy owl, which is about the size of a small songbird, so you could hold it in your hand. And I think you do have these in the US as well, perhaps in the boreal forest, or what we in Europe call the taiga forest, which is kind of open pine forest. And they are relics of the Ice Age in Europe, where after the last period of glaciation, there were little kind of pockets of Arctic creatures. And the pygmy owl is actually an Arctic creature. It lives in pine forests. And it actually depends upon, interestingly, it's got a very symbiotic relationship with the greater spotted woodpecker. So it's a nest, it's a nester in holes in trees. And so when I went to France with my birding group to have a look at these pygmy owls, they were nesting inside woodpecker nests, and woodpeckers and pygmy owls will battle fiercely over the right to these holes, and they will fight to the death. But the pygmy owl, as you can see, it's doing a very, very good impression there of a rather ferocious eagle of some sort, but actually it's only about 6 inches high. So that's the pygmy owl, and I went to see those in France. Very beautiful. That was an original illustration, which actually picked out the beautiful speckles the pygmy owl has all over it, but particularly on its head. It's a really kind of glowing plumage that this bird has, and when you get close enough to see one, you'll see this kind of incredible kind of camouflage with looks like speckles of light all over its plumage. Absolutely beautiful. So along with the pygmy owl, we also saw what we call in Europe the Tengman's owl, but I think in the US now you call it, it's got a different name.
The burrowing owl?
No, it's not a burrowing owl. It's a bit difficult to see the shape of the owl there because it's hiding. It did not want to be seen. I might remember it in a minute. It's not a hawk owl. Anyway, it's in the book, but I momentarily forgotten what the American name for this owl is. But this owl was actually, and don't try this at home, folks, but the way we got that owl to look out of its nest, we were doing a survey for these owls and to see if they were nesting. And this is a very worried looking female because she's probably got a nest in there. And we were right at the bottom of the tree. And the way to just check if there's an owl in there without disturbing them too much is to just very gently scratch the bark on the bottom of the tree so that you sound like what we call a pine martin, which is a little like an arboreal, like it looks like a small otter, a weasel, a big weasel. Do you call them pine martins in the US? They're the predator of many of these owls. They can go in the hole and devour whatever might be in there. So poor owl was looking out of its hole thinking, what is coming up the tree, and shall I fly off or shall I stay and fight? So that was her fight or flight response there. And of course, this is a screech owl. We call this the Scops owl. And you can see just how difficult, why it's so difficult to see owls. And this is a close-up, and you can see the owl is made itself look like the bark of a tree. And its plumage is perfect for that, but also the shape it's making there with its ear tufts are there to completely blur it with its background. So how difficult would that be to see that owl in the wild? And the other very clever thing they do is they close their eyes to just a little crack because their eyes might be bright yellow, and that would give them away. It's often the way you see an owl is if it's daylight, is its brightly coloured eyes. So that owl is even camouflaging its eyes. So perhaps I'll just show you one more. This is the what we call the Ural owl, which I saw in Finland, but I think that's most closely related to your barred owl, which is quite a large and quite an aggressive species. And this one too is very aggressive. If you're surveying these, you need to wear a motorcycle crash helmet. Yeah. And then one last one I found a bird ringer, or I think you call it banding in the US, in northern Finland, and he was doing a survey of all the eagle owls, the Eurasian eagle owls, and that's a chick there, which is, they nest on the ground in Finland. Peregrines nest on the ground. A lot of these species in Finland nest on the ground, and I'm not quite sure why this is. It's difficult. It's different behavior from other parts of Europe and perhaps the US too. But these species obviously feel quite safe on the ground. They're just so well hidden. They don't have too many predators. So I think that's probably, I knitted that myself.
That's exactly what it looks like.
This is my friend Yero the bird bander with his eagle owl chick, and you can see that he's banded it there on its little foot. You can see they have furry feet, obviously, to keep them warm in the Arctic winter in northern Finland. That's an eagle owl, an adult eagle owl in flight. You can see its fiery eyes. Some of you may have seen those in zoos and in conservation centres. They make quite good captive display owls where people can be educated to find out all about how they survive and how they can be rehabilitated if they've had an accident. There you are. That's its giving its hardest stare. That's the hawk owl, which I'm sure that you have in the US. That's a species that is common to Europe and the US. And the snowy owl, which sometimes blows here. It's not native to Europe at all, but this one had blown like thousands of miles. And I know that they have their eruptions, don't they, in the spring when snowy owls come south en masse from their Arctic hunting grounds, looking for new territory, looking for food, etc. So that's my snowy owl that was found in the UK. Again, it's doing that thing of hiding. It's hiding its yellow eyes. Very interesting. Okay, so that's probably enough of my images for now. There we go.
Thank you so much for sharing those. Oh my gosh, are they just ever so cute and ferocious looking?
Oh, ferocious.
So we do have a couple questions in the chat. Before we go to questions, I want to ask you one about, you had mentioned bird banding, ringing. In your book, you talk about volunteering. And I think you even say something like the secret of volunteering. And the experiences for all that you wrote in your book and what you're doing, I'm going to think that you did a lot of volunteering along the way. And just to hear you talk, it sounds like that might be something that you would recommend to people, that they find a way to volunteer.
Definitely. I think I say in the book, and this is hand on heart, that the secret of volunteering is that it's a gift. It feels like a gift you're giving to the world because you're helping with conservation, and these organizations often really need, other pairs of eyes and hands to help. But also it just is so heart-opening to participate in conservation work. Not only do you get taken to sites that you wouldn't normally see, which have these owl habitats or these other birds habitats, you sometimes get an opportunity to get close to the creatures. So when I was helping the Barn Owl Trust, which are an international educational and conservation organization, they were doing their 10-year survey, and I talk about this at the beginning of the book. It was very exciting. I phoned them up and said, I need to find out more about barn owls. You're the experts. Can you please tell me whether you need any volunteers? And they were so happy. They said, yes, we do. Thank you. And I had to put my foot at the bottom of the ladder while, my barn owl experts climbed the ladder, got the baby barn owls out of the nest, counted them, put them in little bags, brought them down, gave them to me to hold. So I got to hold the owls. And I call this research, but really I spent several weeks holding baby owls, which, to be honest, is quite fun and satisfying. And also you get lots of cuddles, because interestingly, when you take an owlet out of the nest, for some reason they don't know to be scared. I think they've got so little understanding of the world that they just kind of sit there quite happily. And I've had little baby barn owls kind of snuggled up to me going, "Oh, are you my mummy now?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So they had to prize them out of my hands. But yes, I mean, volunteering, I would really recommend. I'm wearing this t-shirt where I've been, just last week, my daughter and myself went together to the Isles of Scilly, this lovely archipelago I mentioned in the Atlantic, just off the coast of the UK, to count seabirds, threatened species of puffin and Manx shearwater and storm petrels and all sorts of exciting, amazing birds I would never have got close to normally. And got taken, in little boats kind of to these rocky isles to get clambering up and look in the nests and take, note down what we saw, etc., and count chicks and eggs, etc. So yes, to cut a long story short, volunteering is wonderful. You get to meet people who are as passionate about these creatures as you learn stuff, you get close to these animals that you'd never normally get close to. So yeah, hand on heart, if you feel like it might be something that you would like to try, do it.
Thank you for that, Miriam. It is. It's great. Um, that kind of leads into the baby chicks. In your experiences, as you've studied and talked to folks, we have a question about behavior and the relationship between siblings. And so Laura's asking, she says she's been watching a family of great horned owls for the past 6 months and watching them preening, snuggling, play fighting, that kind of thing. And then just, can you speak to maybe some of the behavior of siblings? And then she further is curious about, when they go off of their, to find their own territories, do they ever visit each other again, or?
Yeah, well, I'm afraid it's not such a happy story about sibling owls. Certainly the species that I've come across, and I think this is fairly common across most owl species and many birds of prey, other birds of prey as well, diurnal birds of prey, that, well, for example, what barn owls do is they lay their eggs at intervals. So the owls hatch out, and so you get a tiny little baby owl that's just been born, and you get the bigger siblings. And if there's not enough to eat, I'm very sorry, but that littlest one is going to be dinner. And this is quite common for older siblings to devour the younger ones or the weaker ones, and to persecute them. So it's not really that great between siblings. And owls are generally very, very territorial because they are competing for food. They are a top predator. Food may be scarce. They're under pressure, living close to humans. We're encroached on their habitat. We've introduced roads that they haven't evolved to understand about. Their habitats are broken up and encroached upon and often very badly compromised. So there's less food around for the owls, in which case they're even more territorial. So in order to survive, when the young fledge, they will disperse and immediately go and find their own habitats, and usually their own territories, and usually that will be kind of slightly outside the range of the other siblings and the parents too. So for example, in January, February time, when the owls have been making all these lovely, the tawny owls around my house have been making all these lovely cooing, burbling, bibbling, romantic sounds, by November, when it's time for the teenage owl to disperse, it gets a lot noisier and a lot grumpier as the adult owls are chasing out the young ones, it's time to go, guys. That's we've done our work. We've taught you everything you need to know. Off you go. So siblings compete with each other. They're often aggressive and they do attack and kill each other. So it's really very much the survival of the fittest, I'm afraid.
Thanks for sharing that. We often have very romantic notions about what goes on, and put human traits on animals, just because it might feel good to be able to have that feeling. Although I must admit, for any of you that grew up with lots of siblings, there's a lot of bickering that goes on.
Yeah, hopefully it's not quite that bad in the human homes, but maybe sometimes. But I should say that I'm talking about owls in the wild. I mean, this is what my book is all about. It's about how owls behave and survive in the wild, what it feels like to come near to encounter wild owls. The experiences you'll get with captive owls in sanctuaries, and if they're being rehabilitated or even kept as pets, the owls will behave very differently. They might be sociable with each other. They might be really affectionate with the other owls that they're sharing space with, and they'll certainly be really affectionate with their owners if they're pets, because they see them as a mate. And so you'll get all this lovely kind of preening behavior where the owls will kind of nibble each other's ears and be kissing and affectionate with each other, and they'll do that with people as well. But my position is that owls are much better in the wild, much better off being what they evolved to do. And I feel like we're compromising ourselves as humans, keeping them as captive and anthropomorphizing as much as we do. And what we really need to be thinking about is not take our eye off the ball and look at how we can preserve their habitat and their survival, because they are so precious.
They are. And, one of the things that we talk about in the bird conservation arena is how valuable these types of birds are in our environment. The predators that they eat, the things that they keep in check is so important. And somewhere, I've seen this a lot, the pyramid, about how many rodents, owls, and other birds of prey will eat, and it's astonishing how much. You have a quote in your book, maybe in the middle-ish of your book, that just kind of popped out when you were talking about this, and owls and their magnificence. But you have a quote in here. It looks like you've quoted somebody, but I wanted to believe in this magnificent wild creature's resilience and survivability. And to your point of what you just talked about related to survivability, for me, this might be a story about the resourcefulness of a species, a sign of hope that in spite of natural challenges such as dangerous sea crossings, human threats, this animal could possibly make it here.
Yeah. I think that was the story. I was talking about the Eurasian eagle owl, which arrived in the UK mysteriously, and nobody knew quite how it got there. And I think in the end, it was discovered that it had been released by somebody, or it had escaped, because owls do escape and they can survive. And I think people might have heard of the story of the eagle owl that escaped from the New York Zoo and was surviving in Central Park. And for me, yes, this is a very optimistic story that these creatures are resourceful. They are adapted to survive. The owl is just perfect at being an owl. We may not be very good at being human sometimes, but owls are always good at being owls. And this is what they're evolved for, murder by stealth, and, nesting, breeding, surviving the winter, getting through. And the book is very, very much about, it's a story of hope and how resilient nature can be. And I really wrote it to promote that idea, to make people feel like, you know, when we're at our best as humans, when we're conserving wildlife, protecting habitats, we can protect these species and allow them to thrive, and just allow them to do what they can do naturally, and the world will be so much better a place with them in it, and with a huge diversity of species. I mean, there are more than 250 species of owls in the world. I got an email from people, email me on social media with photographs, and there was a photograph of this owl, and I could tell. She said, what owl is this, Miriam? You must know. And I said, well, there are more than 250 species. I don't know all of them, but I can tell it's a fish owl. So I looked up fish owls in the area that she'd been walking on a walking holiday in northern Pakistan. And it was obviously this northern Pakistan fish owl species. And I checked with Jonathan Slott, who's an American ornithologist and conservationist and writer, and he said, yeah, that's right, there's a such and such fish owl. So yeah, there are so many species, so much beautiful diversity, and I've no idea actually how many species there are in the US, but you're so lucky to have so many more species than we do in the UK. We only have 5 or 6 species here. So I think the US might be my next foray, I think, into volunteering.
That sounds great. But now you're going to write about otters next. Is that your next book,
That's
Otters?
right. Oh, well, it's already written, and it's coming out with Tin House. Otter Country, it's called, and it's coming out with Tin House February 2024. So not long to go. And that's all about my story, my childhood obsession with the wild otter, and how they were nearly extinct in this country, but they made a comeback due to some really careful conservation work and science discovering what it was that was making these otters extinct. It wasn't actually hunting, it was pollution and habitat loss, but mainly pollution that was destroying their ability to breed. The chemical kind of concoction that was going into the rivers and into our water systems was so toxic to the aquatic ecosystem that otters were just stopping breeding and they were dying out. And Otter Country is a story of how, once we discovered this, otters made the most magnificent comeback, pretty much all on their own. They just kind of spread from some of the more wilder, untouched places where there were a few clean rivers left, and they spread back all across through the river systems of the UK. And now we're pretty much at capacity for otters. So I wanted to write that story because it is so easy to become overwhelmed with gloom about extinction. And I saw in the story of the otter how, you know, when we put our minds to it and we are at our best and using science and conservation at its best, we can rescue these species. And the otter is a really good news story. So Otter Country is all about that.
So that reminds me of another passage in your book that I actually drew a little heart by it.
Oh.
I was reading it. It strikes me that despite the ups and downs of our shared history, in this particular instance, humans might be making some progress. When we get it right and work with nature rather than against it, we can achieve the most extraordinary things.
Did I write that? It's true.
In your barn owl chapter.
I know. But it's true. It's when we get it right, we can achieve the most extraordinary things. I mean, I think that we should all kind of have that emblazoned on our hearts, striving to get it right for the natural world. We can achieve amazing things. And I'm an optimist. I know that, you know, we've got climate disaster going on and we've got extinction of species, but there is so much that we can do. And so Owl Sense is really, sorry, that's the original British title. The Wise Hours is an investigation into what can be done. And one of the things, of course, that you can never take away is the love we all have the absolute love that people have for the wild and for the wild species. And I would say, you know, choose a species that you really identify with. Investigate it, learn more about it, volunteer if you can, fall in love with something. I mean, it really does make your heart bigger, and it's such a contribution to the world.
Thank you for that. I enjoyed the book an awful lot and enjoy just the way that you captured so much of what you did to learn more and people that you visited in that process. You mentioned the original title of the book, and one of my questions actually that I had written down was, what about the title of the book? What made you choose, and or did your publishers help you choose the wise hours? What was your kind of thinking behind that?
That's a really interesting question. Well, Owl Sense was the original title in the UK. And I think some people bought the book thinking that it was a science book. And it's not really a science book. It's a mixture of travel writing, discovery, memoir. There's a story woven in, which we haven't mentioned, to the narrative about my journey to find owls was hugely interrupted when my son got very ill. And he was a teenager and he suddenly started having seizures mysteriously. And this was a drama and a catastrophe for the family. And so that the search for his cure is kind of woven in. So there's memoir in there too, kind of woven into my journey. And but Benji, my son, came along to watch owls with me. So it's not just a science book. There's a lot of science in there, and there's a lot of discovery in there, and there's a lot of encounter and sensory kind of scintillating experience of what it feels like to get close to these creatures and to share that with your family. So it's not just a science book, and it's memoir and travel and natural history and family narrative all woven together. So people will find something to identify in there that kind of keeps them going. The family narrative is almost like a hook. So the wise hours came from my conversations with my editor at Tin House, who also has a family, and who remembered with small children how you sit up at night worrying about your family and preparing and caring as a mother. So she saw it as a kind of journey towards wisdom in terms of looking after the family as well as looking after wild creatures. And she chose that title, and I just thought it was lovely. I thought it was a really lovely new perspective on the book. So that's how we chose that one.
I like it. And you're right, you have woven so much into this book that it makes it a great story with some really meaty, helpful, fun information.
Hmm.
So as we get ready to head to the end of this hour, it is so delightful having you here, Miriam. And yes, don't we all agree she should make a trip here to do something?
Thank you so much. I would love to.
When you let us know when you're ready to do that, and we will accommodate you however we can. But,
Alicia, is there time for like a 2-minute reading of an owl encounter?
absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
We said that might be just to give people a flavor of some of the description in the book, because what I try to do is bring alive what it feels like when you get close to an owl. And this encounter was one of the most extraordinary I had. I got very close, in fact, too close for comfort, to a short-eared owl, which is the most beautiful yellow-eyed, kind of round, beautiful round-faced owl, which was swooping over the moors near my home. And I was searching for it and searching for it, and finally got a little bit closer than I thought, than I had been expecting. A flicker caught my eye. After all this time, out of the gold of the winter grass came a pair of long wings, laden with all the browns and ochres of the moor, the darkness of bramble and old deadwood and winter bracken, the sepia and gold of the grasses. As it shimmered past, I turned to see it hover a little, its wings in a V shape, the pale circle of its face pointing downward. Aiming into the tangle of lichens and furs, it dropped vertically and vanished. Asio flammeus, the flame-eyed owl. It couldn't have been more than 20 yards away. The owl lifted without moving its wings as some invisible draught blew it closer. It hovered again and turned, revealing pale underwings with clear black tips, the carpal patch close enough almost to touch. A slant of light brightened the leading edges of its wings, the beaten gold of its primaries, and the white trailing tips as the bird circled, quartered, veering uphill toward me. I must have looked like a part of the landscape. The owl came closer, fixing its yellow eyes upon me until it was so close I could pick out the individual black masking around its eyes. And still it came. And then it stretched out its legs and reached right out towards my head. I yelped, partly from my own surprise and panic at this owl's mistake, but mainly to put it off course. To my amazement, the owl yelped back, just as I ducked to avoid being scalped. It had taken me in my brown camouflage gear for nothing more than a tussocky perch. I don't know which of us was more shocked. I sat, dry-mouthed, heart thumping, owl dazzled, from the follicles on my scalp to the tips of my toenails. Thank you.
Thank you. That was lovely. Your whole book is lovely. I enjoyed it so much. And I know some people have read the book and some people haven't. And so, Daisy, do we have this book available in the Environment for the America shop? No. So
We
folks have to
we
go to
don't
your
selling
local-
book anymore in the shop. Sorry.
So we have to go to your local bookstore to find the book. Yes, it's a beautiful book.
Thank you, Miriam.
All right, Miriam, thank you so much again for joining us. This has just been so delightful. And thank you everybody who has joined us today, taking time out of your busy schedules to hang out with us a little bit. And Daisy, can you remind us what's our next book club?
Keep Looking by Tama Watts. It's Healing from Birdwatching.
Great, and that's in August on the, looking at my calendar, on the 24th, is that right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
I will
Okay.
send an email to everyone next week.
Great. Great. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us. Thank you so much, Miriam. The book is delightful. It would make a great gift for so many people. And it's just like I said, I put hearts next to things that just kind of.
Thank you so much. It's been a real delight. It's always lovely to talk to people about owls and about our shared passion of birds and conservation. So thanks so much for inviting me. And thank you so much, everybody, for coming and for listening.
Yeah, thank you. And lots of kudos in the chat here for you.
Thank you. I can see.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.